like everyone else, I'm really happy to be here and meet elected members, some of whom I have never met before. And in that context, it was a great pleasure to lead the anniversary issue. Not only for its sort of keywords format, which, as Elisa said, was really a kind of inventive way to kind of think about social text history, but also for the interviews and the kind of historical essay that Brent and Anna put together about the history of social text. So thank you for putting the anniversary together, and thank you to the collective for supporting it. As I said, a lot of that history I wasn't aware of. Now, I can put a lot of that to my own ignorance, but not entirely. And I think it has something to do with the way in which social text function as a collective, at least in my experience. When I joined the social text in the mid-90s, as the essay notes, social text was more of a kind of a space of fluidity and transformation, rather than one of continuity and stability that one associates with collective. This meant that, of course, it enabled the social text to be very flexible. As soon as I joined, and I think within 6 months we were recruiting fresh members were coming in, and others were cycling out. So there was a kind of sense of in and out, and the space was never kind of fixed and stable. And this permitted then social text to be very attentive and responsive to new things. It was able to speak to and engage with new tendencies, new disciplinary trends, to new political challenges, and we published articles that were very topical and very contemporary. So I mean, I can think of, just on the top of my head, issues on transnational adoption, on queer studies, on postcolonial studies, on a variety of issues that were kind of coming up from time to time. And so this gave the journal a kind of a sense of cutting edge. It was the journal that was always on the edge. It was always responding to something new, which was partly for the critics also its fault, that it was too cutting edge. But whatever, I mean, it was in that sense very responsive. That was its strength. But given the fact that it had this structure, the sense of collective that one associates normally with the collective was, at least in my experience, a kind of a challenge to maintain. How do you, I mean, one expects collective to be a kind of a closely knit group with intense and heated political arguments, debates, and engagements. And from the history that you provided, it seems that at some point it was that way. But then by, as I said, by the mid-90s, my experience was, as I said, one of, fluidity, change, transformation, people coming in and out. And in that context, it was very difficult to maintain this idea of a collective, a politically engaged collective. So to the extent that we were a collective, our critically engaged collectivity was expressed in monthly editorial meetings and in producing a journal. Now, if that's the extent of what we think a collective is, then, we did fine. But if one thinks of collective as something more than that or different than that, then I think it was a challenge to kind of maintain that. And I say this because my experience at social text, to some extent, paralleled what was also occurring in the other collective I was associated with, subaltern studies. Subaltern studies also by the late 90s was becoming a different kind of a collective. And although its history was very different, it began with a very clear goal and clear aim. And it consisted of people who had known each other for a long time, were friends, and they had a kind of a common project. And in a way, I think the issue of subaltern studies was that once its kind of goal had been achieved, there was an issue of where do we go from here? Who are we? And at various point, you know, I mean, there was a discussion of should we disband? And, you know, I mean, I said, well, even the Beatles disbanded, so, you know, who are we? We can disband too. But there was this kind of issue of who we are, and with the, you know, emergence of email and digital kind of facility, it actually worked against our functioning as a collective, which I think, in a way, parallels also my experience in social text. By the late 90s, it wasn't always necessary to have face-to-face meetings to actually discuss, or at least at the first round, discuss many of the articles. You could do it over email, so it became more efficient. But on the other hand, our functioning as a collective was different from what one normally associates with a collective. And I imagine that remains a challenge, but you know, it was, I think, in my experience, a challenge at that time. So that was one of the things that, you know, as I was reading the discussion on collective, one of the thoughts that occurred to me, how does one maintain a collective in these times? And it's not something really just only particular to social text, but it has to do with, you know, our context, it has to do with professionalism, it has to do with technology, and it has to do with the nature of political commitment and universities and so on in our times. The second issue that I wanted to just raise, and again this went back to the account of history that is provided in the anniversary issue, that the social text began really as a journal of the US left, and an attempt to study culture through Marxism, or bring Marxism to renew the kind of study of culture. And over the years, I mean, if you look at the issues, the journal really has done a wonderful job in addressing many of the kind of, you know, standard left issues and expanding those left issues, bringing in new constituencies, bringing in new perspectives, providing critical writings on US policies or issues of racism, homophobia, sexism, and so on. Bringing in new kinds of disciplinary formations like postcolonial studies, and as the essay mentions, and that remains a kind of continuing concern. And it always was also internationalist in its orientation, so it didn't only look at the US, but looked at, you know, Latin America, China, and so on. But, and I don't mean this, well, I mean this as a critique actually, but I've yet to see, in a sense, a reflexivity in social text about its own position as a US left journal. That it is situated in the kind of, you know, it's in the belly of the beast, it's at the heart of the empire. And to be a left journal here, what does it mean to be a left journal and adopt a perspective for the entire world, and not at the same time engage in a kind of a global conversation where you have people from other parts of the world also offering their own global international perspective. So, as I said, I mean, I'm not faulting social text for not having an international perspective. It is, you know, the left has always been internationalist in its orientation. But it is as if we sit from here and look at the world rather than have the world also look at the US left. What does it mean to be in the US left? I actually have to run to downtown. So I wish I could stay for the discussion, but thank you.